All right, we're going to do chapter 2 today, which is distributive bargaining. We talked about this a little bit in the first lecture. So this is our winner take all. Basically, you're focusing on the outcome, not the relationship. How can we get the best deal? So if you look at my notes, a guy wants to buy a condo. He finds one listed for $145, which is 10 more than he wants to pay. So he wants to be in the $130, $135 range. Asking price is $145. But and so it's $5,000 less than he would be willing to pay. Okay, so he wants to pay $135, but he's willing to go to $150. And anytime you guys are going to buy something, you're going to need a range. You're not going to find something exactly for the price you want. So have a range, have your target price, which is what I want to buy it at, but you also got to have a range that, and the 150 is important because that's called your walkaway point. You've got to have a point where at some point I'm not going to do the deal. And a lot of that in this situation should be predicated on finances. You can figure out what your payments are going to be. I don't want to have cash flow for rent over or payment for my condo over X amount each month. So that's where the 150 comes from. So it says we now have a distributive situation because she's asking 145. So is that in his range? Yeah, it's more than he wants to pay, but it's acceptable because he will actually pay $5,000 more. But is he going to tell her that? Is he going to tell her that, hey, 150 is my walkaway point? No, not at all. But the good thing is she's already asked, or she's already offered 145. So at that point, that should be the top price. I think I mentioned to you guys, I've seen one time in my life where people actually paid more than asking price, and that was around 2006, 2007 for housing, when there was just no inventory and people were actually bidding on houses. It was crazy. And most of all those people are underwater on mortgages right now. It was just a really different time. Never seen it like that in my lifetime. All right, so information's got to be guarded. It only gives when it brings a strategic advantage. So what you want to do is try to get information. You don't want to divulge information. And how do you get information? Ask. And then when we ask them, what do we got to do? You got to listen, right? You got to listen. And that's one of the things about being a good negotiator or even being a good manager. You got to listen and let other people do the talking. Matter of fact, I heard somebody the other day talking about a salesperson, talking about why they were good. So when you think about selling, do salespeople talk? Yeah, you sell your product or whatever. You know why this guy said he was a good salesperson? He said, because I'm a great listener. I tell people, ask them a question, and let them talk. Why is that successful?
Because if you listen to somebody's problem, then you can offer a solution.
Okay, because it gives me information. Why else? Okay.
People like to talk and feel important.
Okay, what is the most thing about your friends and that is really when you know you've really got a friend? Trust them, and what else? And how do you? What shows caring more than listening to somebody?
They ask about your life.
Yeah, and the problem that you really don't care about, but you're going to listen to them, and that's people that are good listeners. I promise you, find them. They got a lot of friends. Because people like to talk about themselves. So it's not hard a lot of times to get information. Ask questions and then let them do the talking. It's like later in my mother's life, bless her, but I couldn't take her anywhere when I was trying to do stuff. Oh yeah, we own a 400-acre farm in Arkansas. We have all, and that's just not information that you want to divulge. When I buy cars, I drive the oldest car that I own at the time. Why would I do that?
Shows lower socioeconomic status.
And that maybe I can't afford. So I drive up now in my 2003 F-150. I don't take the Porsche. No, I can't afford that. It's an old Porsche. Not worth a whole lot, but it's a perception of things. And that gives people, when you drive up in an old beat-up car and say, I need a new car, what's their perception right off the bat? This person's not going to be able to spend a lot of money. So think about perception, how important it is. All right, so 3 reasons why we should be familiar with distributive bargaining. If we're in an independent situation, we have to know how the distributive process works. We need to know how to counter the effects of the strategies. And then every situation has, even in a integrative situation, at the end, we're going to divvy up and finally decide where we're at. So even though it's an integrative process, I'm working with you, at the end, there's a little bit of a distributive process. So many times my notes, distributed situation, parties focus too much on the differences and ignore what they have in common. And that can be a problem with negotiating, is you want to focus on what you have in common first. All right, so in the distributive bargaining situation, the goals of one party are in direct conflict to the other party. The lady selling the condo wants the highest price she can get. The guy buying the condo wants the lowest price he can get. Resources are fixed and limited. It's one condo. And then maximizing our share of resources is a goal for both parties, which is why pretty much I've told you most car buying situations are distributive. That salesman gets paid on commission. The higher the price is, the more money they make, and then you want the lowest price. How many of you, any of you guys have parents that work in real estate? Okay, is there a fundamental kind of breach, I would say, in the real estate market? So if I'm buying a house, what should my real estate agent be trying to do for me?
Reduce the price.
Reduce the price. Okay, how do they get paid?
Commission.
On
Price.
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? Does it not set up kind of, and you know what, good, honest real estate people will work and represent you, but you see how kind of there could be a conflict right off the bat because you get paid on commission, and so the higher the house.
But I don't think that like doing real estate like that isn't distributive. It's more caring about the relationship. A lot of people won't try to like completely box the deal in order to lower the price so that they can have a better relationship later on.
No, I agree. I mean, there's honest people in every field, and somebody who's good and honest is going to work to get you that best price, and they've got to get you a good price, because that's the other thing though that kind of keeps them in check a little bit is if you don't buy that house, they don't get paid. The selling agent gets paid rather. That's why those listings are so important, because the selling agent gets paid. If you're the listing agent, you get paid whether you sell the house or not. You get paid half of the commission just by having that listing. So if I have somebody representing me, unless I buy a house, they're not going to get paid. And if they know that what my price range is, then they need to try to make me happy. And reputation comes a lot into that too. There's a lot of referrals in that business. But I'm just saying, on the surface, it sets up as a conflict of interest, because somebody that gets paid to have a higher price, are they really, in theory, motivated to get the lowest price? Right, so it could set up like that. All right, so maximizing our goals. That's the whole point of the distributive process. All right, so we got a starting point. That's our initial offer. So that's the lady offers, ask 145, and the guy counters with 130. That's going to be our starting point. Our target point. Okay, so the lady, it didn't say in that scenario, if she's asking 145, her target's probably going to be 140, 135, somewhere around there. She's probably going to be willing to come off a little bit. Personally, you know, I would try to bump it up a little more, depending, it gives you that more room to come down. And then the resistance point, it's the bottom line, the most they will pay. So do both parties have a resistance point? Yeah. If it comes down too low, she's not going to sell it. She's got to have a certain amount, and she will know that. He can't pay more than a certain amount. So that's what we said defines that bargaining range. We'll talk about that in just a second. So resistance or walkaway points, and then alternatives are outcomes. And if you have alternatives, you are in a position of strength. So the guy's looking at this condo. It's in the area he needs to be in, and there's four other condos for sale. Does he have alternatives? Sure. So she's got to take that into effect when she knows if they're comparable, there's four others out there. and depending on how bad she wants to sell her condo. Okay, what if this is the only condo in that area? Who's in a position of strength? The seller, exactly. And it's amazing to me right now that it's like a seller's market. And it just blows my mind with what happened in housing in Tallahassee that prices have bounced back and are as high as they are. And actually, you go out to Southwood, they're building like a ton of new houses out there. And it's just kind of shocking to me, but it seems like it definitely in Tallahassee, it's a little bit of a seller's market. I had a couple of houses on my street sell very, very quickly, which I was kind of surprised, and for a really decent price, which is good if you own a home in that area. All right, so alternatives help shape the process. All right, so the bargaining range, and that's what I just talked about, and it's also called the settlement range, zone of potential agreement. That's the spread between the resistance points, or the spread between the opening offer and counter offer. So she's asking 145, he counters with 130, so that bargaining range, that price is going to fall somewhere between 130 and 145, and that's called a positive bargaining range, because we know that deal can happen. A negative bargaining range, if the seller's resistance point is above the buyer. So let's just say she's asking 145, but his resistance point is 140. He can't go higher than 140, and 145 is her bottom line. Is a deal going to happen? What would have to happen for a deal to happen? Somebody would have to change their resistance point. Right, and so that's called a negative bargaining situation where the resistance points don't cross. Then that means there's a gap in between what she'll take and what he'll pay. And so that at that point, in theory, you can say there's no deal going to happen. And once again, always at some point, no deal is better than a bad deal. There's times when walking away is a smart thing to do. All right, so this just kind of puts it in a linear fashion. So we see our asking price, we see the target. So if the asking price is 145, her target's going to be about 135 or 140 maybe, and her walkaway point may be 135. So that's the point. She can't sell it or will not sell it for any less than that. And the same thing with the buyer. You have his target point. He doesn't want to pay more than 135. You got the asking price his initial offer is 125, but then the walk away he said was 150. He would not pay more than that. So that just kind of explains it in linear terms. Okay, next slide. You don't really need to worry about it. Shows it, and it just, well, the one that shows alternatives. I guess we'll get to it in a second. Yeah, that's the one with alternatives. You don't need to worry about that because it's kind of hard to put alternatives in a linear view. All right, so we talked about alternatives, though. They give the negotiator power to walk from the negotiation. If the alternatives are attractive, you can set your goals higher, make fewer concessions. But if there's no alternatives, you have less bargaining power. And that's why it just really, the one message, one thing I know that all you guys are going to buy a car during your lifetime, multiple cars probably. You are in a position of power. And I think many people, how many walking in here would have thought you were in a position of strength buying a car? Okay, good. Because you are. Why? Because where can you buy a car? Especially with the internet now. Everywhere, exactly. And if they don't sell you that car, they don't make any money. So they want to sell that car worse than you want to buy it. So keep that in mind. But what does it require to do that? It requires time and research, and you got to. And a lot of people don't have time sometimes. A lot of people aren't willing to invest the time. So that's the other thing you got to ask yourself. What's your time worth? Is it worth putting in a month worth of studies to get a $300 better deal?
Yeah, so the kind of two things. I think an additional layer is sometimes, especially with the car business, it's different for each car. So if it's a used car, maybe it is that where you have a lot of strength. And if you're in a dealership that's in a town of 20,000, they need you as a customer. They can't afford to piss you off. But if you're in like Fort Lauderdale or Miami, and they've got like a blacked out Dodge Charger with a Hemi, like they know that they're gonna be able to sell that. So if you don't take it, they know that they can keep it for an extra 10 days, and that car is gonna sell. So I would say it's kind of like the second layer to it. And then a strategy that I always picked up on was it's called reduce to the ridiculous. So they say, okay, you want the car payment because it's $50 lower, this 30 days a month. So for like $1.25, which is, a fifth of what your Starbucks costs, and you could be out here in a brand new car, but you're still gonna be in that car that you paid and stuff. So it's just, reduce the price difference so ridiculous to make it seem like they should do that.
Yeah, and the other thing though is when I bought my first car, and this is back in the 80s, you know what the maximum they would finance a car for was? How long? 3 years. Okay, that was it. You had to have it paid off in 3 years. How long will they finance a car for now? 80 months. I know some of them will. 86. 7 years. And so think about it. And it's one thing I've taught personal finance before too. And cars are the biggest drain that you're going to have in your life. They are not an investment. Anybody that thinks that, you're wrong. Okay? Cars are not an investment. I'm going to pay $40,000 for an asset, and I'm going to pay payments on it, so I'm paying interest. So now for a $40,000 car, over 8 years financing, I'm going to pay $49,000 for that car. And at the end of 8 years, what's that asset going to be worth? Less than $10,000 probably. An 8-year-old car. So you're going to lose money on the car over time. But you got to have a car to drive. So there's all kinds of theories and all. And your average millionaire drives a 2-year-old car. Why? Because that's the cheapest way to get it. Once it depreciates, the most depreciation in the car, is the first, when you're driving out the showroom door, boom, price goes down.
So as a young professional, why would you do anything besides leasing a car?
Well, if you follow the personal finance gurus, they will tell you that leasing is the worst option. Because at the end of your time, you have nothing. So how do you calculate what a car costs you? And this is what you need to do. If I buy, let's just say I buy a $10,000 car. What's the most I'm going to lose on that car? $10,000, right? So if I drive that car for five years and sell it for $6,000, let's just say $5,000, then it's cost me $1,000 a year to drive that car. Okay, if I'm leasing a car for $300 a month, what's it costing me a year to lease that car? $3,600. Right. So now, what's the kicker of buying a $10,000 car? You got to add your maintenance back in there. Okay, not brakes, and because those are standard, but you got to add any maintenance. So that $10,000 car, over that 5 years, I had to spend $2,000 in repairs. So now I've got 12,000 minus 5, 7,000 divided by 5 years. That tells you what your yearly cost is. So the best car I ever bought, I totaled the car. Actually, somebody hit me. So I bought an old Toyota Celica. I paid $3,300 for it. I drove it for 5 years, and I sold it for $1,500, and I put a water pump in it during those 5 years. It cost me almost nothing to drive that car, but I just bought my wife a new car. Whenever we do that, I can figure the average, and I'll be able to determine what it's going to cost, what it cost me per year to do that. But I want her in something safe, and there's all kinds of considerations. But just keep in mind, the purpose of a car is to get you from point A to point B safely. Target point is the price I want to pay. Okay, and if I'm the seller, that's the price that I want to walk away with, at least that price. So when the lady asked $145, is she realistically probably expecting to get $145? No. But what's her target? Okay, I want at least $140. I'm going to ask $145, but I want at least $140. His target was $135, but he was willing to pay up to $150. So your target is where you want to be, what you hope the price is at the end of the negotiation. Okay? Correct. And you understand why? Because it's called concessions, and we'll talk about that. If let's just say that same condo was $160, and then all of a sudden the lady comes down to $145, what's the buyer's perception going to be? I'm getting a good deal. Boy, I got her down $15,000. Okay? That's the whole point about setting your target point, setting your starting price a little higher than maybe you would, and making your initial offer a little lower than you normally would. All right, alternatives. So we talked about that. Very good to have alternatives if you can. All right, so the bargaining mix. This comes into play sometimes too. Sometimes there's issues other than the actual price. Remember we talked about tangible and intangible? So tangible is the actual price. It's something you can touch, you can feel. But there's intangibles. I told you about the house that I bought, that I sold, and I had to be out in 30 days. Well, when you sell a house, do you leave the curtains?
They want them. You're gonna pay for them.
It's negotiable. Okay? There's no rule that says this house comes with curtains. It's not part of the house, right? Because you can remove it. Now, most people don't take curtains with them, or blinds, or whatever. They may not fit your new house. Refrigerator is a big one. Do you leave the refrigerator? In most cases, no. In some cases, yes, you can. So that's called the bargaining mix. The date. Okay, when do I have to be out? That was a challenge. When I sold the house, I had to be out in 30 days, which meant I had to close on another house, get it ready, and be moved in 30 days.
Do you feel like now with a lot more properties increasingly becoming pre-furnished, do you feel like that gives the realtor kind of more negotiating power?
It depends, because there's got to be a huge transition for that to be really in vogue, because what if you have all your own stuff? What do you do with that stuff? I don't want a furnished place. Okay, I wouldn't be in the market for a furnished place. Why? Because I have a house full of stuff that I would have to do something with. For young people, yes, and who's hit it big is like IKEA. It's reasonable, it's cheap, and when you move, you just walk away from it or sell it, pretty cheap. But my son moved to San Francisco. It was cheaper for him to buy IKEA than it was to move his stuff out there. Yes. Yep. It depends on who has the alternatives. Right. The alternatives give whoever has them power. And that's why if you guys need a roof on your house, there's 20 roofers in Tallahassee. Call several of them. Once again, how much of your time is it worth to go through and call and get bids? But I think too many times we just take the first offer. And are you getting the best deal when you do that? Probably not. Because what's that person's first price probably going to be? If I know I don't have any competition. And that's why when I teach managing growth, and we talk about being how do you get being in an advantageous position as a business owner? You produce a product or service that nobody else produces. Then could you charge more for it? Sure. Why? Because there's no alternatives. All right, so alternatives are going to be their business or negotiating. Alternatives are just their power. If you have them, or if you have none, think about the job market, guys. Some of you guys this year, some of you guys 2 years away from interviewing for a job. You got 3 job offers. You have alternatives. Is that good? What happens if you got one offer for $35,000? You may end up taking it, right? And then you could start looking for something else. But if money's running out, time's running out, and you got one offer, you're not in a good position.
So in the case of roofing, would you ever call up a company, get their price, and then call them later and just make up a number?
I would never do that.
Like an ethical sort of thing right there?
Correct.
But even if you got the lowest price,
I wouldn't have a problem if I got 5 bids in and I really wanted contractor 1, but their price was higher, calling them going, look, I want you to do the work, but I've got a much cheaper bid. Do you have any wiggle room?
I see.
Okay. And let me tell you a story about this. And I have a buddy that's you guys ever heard of Accenture? They're the largest consulting company in the world. And my friend, he retired as global sales manager for Accenture. The guy traveled the world, just made tons of money. And when he retired, he's got a heart for children. And we went to church together, and I've been on several mission trips with him and his family, but just really a heart for children. And so Governor Scott appointed him to be head of DCF, Department of Children and Family Services. Huge job. So now he's got 20,000, 30,000 employees. But what's the difference in an employee at Accenture and a state employee? Yeah, I mean, those guys at Accenture are killing it because they can make a lot of money if they work hard. People at the state pretty much get paid a salary. So it's very hard to motivate those people. But one other story he told me. He said Florida had to put in a law, or they didn't have to, they chose to, because what was happening, people who had purchasing power with the state, who's the largest purchaser in Tallahassee? Who buys more goods and services than anybody in Tallahassee? The state of Florida, exactly. So those contracts, are they lucrative? Yeah. So what happens when the guy in charge of purchasing takes a higher bid because it's his buddy? Does that happen? Yeah. So the state passed a law that said you got to take sealed bids and you got to take the lowest bid. So my buddy's telling me that is a nightmare. Why would that be bad? Don't you want your tax dollars protected and you don't want us overpaying for services?
Sometimes people do a crappy job.
Is the lowest price always the best?
Or maybe cropping up your
Yeah, and he said, I ended up having to take some vendors that I knew couldn't do what they said they could do with the price they offered. And it ended up causing more problems than it would had we paid more. But they tried to take it out of people's hands to make those decisions because anytime people are involved, we have the chance of corruption. So that's the whole, whole thing in a nutshell. But he said, once you try to box it in like that, it's almost counterproductive the other way. Because the cheapest deal is not always the best deal. And it's a thing called value. You guys pay more for some stuff than you would, or you pay more for a certain pair of shoes or clothes than you would for a no-name brand. Why? Because the quality is better. So that goes into it too. Okay, but that's all about pricing. Okay, but go back to the bargaining mix. Sometimes there's more than just the price. It's kind of everything else that goes in there. All right, so what are the fundamental strategies? Push for a settlement near the opponent's resistance point. Yeah, that's a great strategy. Problem is, how am I going to know their resistance point? Are they going to come out and say, well, I'm asking 145, but my resistance point's 135? That'd be really nice. It's not going to happen. Okay, so you got to ask questions. You got to dig and see if you can find out what the resistance point is. If the settlement range is negative, then one of us has got to change our point or try to convince the other party, and then it becomes sales, really not negotiating. All right, so what are the keys to any four of the strategies? Number one, discover the other party's resistance point. Okay, once again, they're not just going to tell you that. And number two, try to influence the other party's resistance point. And that's, once again, it becomes more about sales. But if I know my stuff and I've got all my facts together, you're not going to convince me that I should take less than what I know it's worth. So once again, that comes into doing your homework, and we'll talk about preparation. All right, so what are some of the tactical tasks? Assess outcome values and the cost of termination for the other party. If that other party, and that's why, going back, and I told you about the house I bought it, a reload company had it. If it had been owned by an individual who was paying 2 mortgages, the cost of not doing the deal is high for that person. That relocation company has deeper pockets. Why do you think so many companies settle cases before they go to trial? And probably most of the trials that I know are against insurance companies. Guys have an accident, you sue the insurance company. It's almost any accident now, there's a threat of a lawsuit that happens. A majority of those are settled. Why? It's cheaper. Right. And I tell you a quick story. I got sued 4 times in 4 years when I owned my business. And the first case, the guy that sued me was a hotel owner that was to my left of my building. And I was up on a hill, and some water got in some of his rooms, and he claimed that when I built my restaurant, I altered the water flow, and it flooded his hotel. Well, he had like a concrete block, little retention thing by the side of his motel, and I walked over to the guy and I said, I'm not very smart, but when it rains, what's to keep water from getting down in that little concrete block area? I come back the next week, and he had a roof put on that concrete block thing. Well, I already had pictures of it. So my attorneys, which represented me, called me and said, we want to settle with the guy. And they go, we don't win the case. And I said, well, I'd rather you not pay them anything, but I wasn't footing the bill because my insurance company was paying it. I said, so you do what you need to do. They offered the guy, I think, $5,000, enough to fix the carpet or whatever, but it would have cost them $40,000 to win the case in lawyer fees and court costs to win $5,000. So it makes no sense. And why do companies pay out big settlements sometimes? I have a buddy that's an attorney, paid out $4 million one time, and he said we had absolutely no liability in the case. Drunk, stumbled out into the road in front of one of their drivers. Guy was obviously drunk, blood test. So does that driver have any liability at all? Not really. But they brought up actuarials who said the cost of care for that person who was now in a wheelchair was going to be 30-something million over this life. They end up paying out $4 million. Why? Because even with no liability, when you get in front of a jury, does that mean you're going to win if you got the best case? Do emotions come into play? Yeah, all of a sudden you see this poor guy in a wheelchair that's going to be in a wheelchair all his life, and they don't care whose fault it is. So that's the art of negotiation, and that's what attorneys do for the most part. Somebody have a question? Yep.
Jury would say, even like, there's like this thing that juries can do that, they can say someone is guilty, but there, and they say that either way we're not making them like punished. Like this
Right.
in Texas, like a guy shot the guy who raped his daughter, and they like acquitted him. And you can get away with like playing like jury's emotions.
Exactly. It's not a, and that's why in most cases, if you've got a solid case, if you can, you would rather bypass a jury and go straight to a judge. Because that judge is supposed to rule on facts. You got a better chance of that happening than you do in playing with a sympathetic jury. Right?
So the liability form for businesses that could cause you injury, will liability form prevent you from getting sued?
Not necessarily anymore. You can have people sign all the forms you want, and people still sue. Now, it doesn't mean they're going to win, and a judge could throw it out going, you sign the form. But when you go like, what's it, zip lining or whatever, you're going to sign a form, right? Knowing that this is dangerous. But if that zip line breaks, you going to sue them? Your family is. You're not going to. Got a chance of winning? Yeah.
The submission didn't say that it was wrongful death due to they signed it with the pre-notion that they thought that
It was safe.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, unfortunately, and even at your house anymore, I mean, you know, somebody breaks into your house and hurts themselves. There's cases where they've sued the homeowner. It's out of control, really. Yes. What's that? No, it's both. The asking price and then the counter offer. Those are both starting points, one for the buyer, one for the seller, and then the range is determined somewhere in between there. Yep, yep. Well, so no, somewhere between the asking points. The target point is where I want at the end. That's the price I want to get. And am I always going to get my target point? Nah, not necessarily. So that's your best case scenario you could hope to get to the target. All right, so manage the other party's impressions. Once again, if you have facts, you can maybe let them know that you have a really solid case and what you're saying is factual. Modify the other person's perceptions and manipulate the actual cost of delay or termination. And there's deals with unions where they threaten strike. That's manipulating the cost of coming to an agreement. Anytime you work with a union, they threaten to go on strike. It can be very costly to the company. All right, so there's two ways we can look at it. It's an indirect assessment. We can get information indirectly about background factors behind an issue, or direct assessment is directly from the other party in the negotiation. So indirect, a company is talking about going on strike. Well, unions have what are called strike funds. So if a union walks out and goes on strike, how do those people eat? They're not getting paid. So the union has a strike fund. So if I'm the company, I'm UPS, and I know my drivers are talking about going out on strike, but I happen to find out that that union has a very, very low strike fund, a very weak strike fund, that puts the company in a position of strength, because how many people, and I don't, the last statistic I heard that was shocking to me was somewhere between 65 and 70% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. You guys heard that? A lot of people highly leveraged and, you know, driving real nice cars, and broke. Okay, so union people, a lot of those people, paycheck to paycheck. That puts the company in a position of strength. But if that union is fully funded and has a very good strike fund, and they can go out for a month, what would it do for the UPS if the company shut down for a month? Tons of money. So once again, you got to weigh that, the pros and cons of that deal, and try to come to an agreement. All right, so indirect, union strike fund, direct, you got to decide if the information the other party is giving you is accurate. So, you know, how do I believe, do you believe when that seller of that car says, oh yeah, it's in mint condition and I've replaced all this stuff, and well, if they don't have invoices where they've had all the work done, do you know they're telling the truth? I mean, you can look at the tires and see if they're pretty new, but oil change schedule, yeah, I change the oil every 3,000 miles. People can misrepresent stuff to you if it's direct. All right, so assess the other party's target resistance points, and then once again, indirectly determining information that they, how did they get their target, what is their resistance point, and then directly, in most cases, guys, if you're dealing with sophisticated negotiators, they're not going to reveal that information to you. So what's one thing about a house? What could you do to figure out kind of how they came to their price?
See what it sold for last time.
Okay, and how many years apart it is. And the other thing is comps in the neighborhood. What are other houses in the neighborhood selling for? And then really, you use kind of a basis per square foot. So if the neighborhood's selling for $100 a square foot, 3,000 square foot house would be 300,000. Okay, and then unless this house has more bells and whistles, and maybe a little bit higher, but you can do comps. And same thing. How does Kelly Blue Book get the price of cars? How do they get the average? When you guys research and go in and plug your car in on Kelly, how does Kelly get that number?
They take an average of like the last 1,000 sold and give you a number.
In your zip code, you put your zip code in. So in your area, it's an average. But here's a great point to remember. What is something worth?
Somebody's willing to pay.
What somebody's willing to pay for it, no more. That Kelly Blue Book can say that car is worth $3,000 or $4,000. If somebody won't pay it, is it worth it? No. Okay. And why do they have the Blue Book? To try to legitimize the used car business. But once again, my truck is, I think on paper, my car guy told me it was worth $3,500, and he told me he'd write a check for me to me immediately, because used pickup trucks are just, you can't find them that are in good shape. And he said he could get $7,000 or $8,000 for it. On paper, it shows being worth $3,000 because it's older, but it's in great shape. So it's not automatic. All right, so manage the other party's impressions, screen your behavior. Once again, driving an old car, how you dress. You know, if you're wearing all this jewelry that's worth a lot of money, you're just going to send that signal that, hey, I'm made of money, versus managing very modestly. Say and do as little as possible. Body language. I went to a seminar a while back, a negotiation seminar, and the guy that ran it said he didn't think body language played a very important part in negotiating. And I absolutely disagree with him. Do you think people's body language sometimes signals more than what their words do, how they're feeling? Yeah, and I think it's almost subconscious sometimes. I think we do things with our body language just automatically. Whereas with words, we have to wait and think and open our mouth and say something. But I think people respond sometimes. And there's actually a lady that's written a book on it, named Tanya Ryman, about like what all these gestures. If you guys are in an interview and that person's leaning forward like this, what does that mean? Yeah, aggressive. They're really intense and more into it versus somebody who's just sitting back and kind of relaxed. So and any of you guys play poker? Is body language important? Yeah, good poker players, what do? It's called poker face. Okay? Glasses, you don't pick up your cards and go, dang.
The best poker players, they actually try to make you see their real movements, and then they use that against you.
Well, you can bluff those movements. And that's why, and we'll get to the whole thing. So is bluffing deception? So is that being ethical and honest? Well, it's part of the game. Okay? Now, if you pull an extra card out of your pocket, is that accepted in poker? No, that's cheating. But bluffing is considered part of the game because you're not actually, it's not like overtly doing it, it's kind of covertly sending a message, but you're not saying anything. So poker's different, but I still think it goes to that. Good poker players have no bodily expression. Good negotiators have no expression. If you're going and helping your kid buy a car, the kid's going, Daddy, I want that car. Is that a good sign? No, not at all, because that salesperson is going to go, oh, this kid wants the car, Dad wants to please the kid, okay, I think I got him there. So try to manage the body language. Direct action to alter impressions. Facts are the most powerful thing that you can present in any argument. If you have your facts together, they're hard to refute. And then selective presentation, most people only reveal facts that help your case. You're not going to reveal the facts that don't help your case. And notes, disappointment or enthusiasm might suggest an issue is important, where boredom or indifference might suggest it's not important. Once again, can people fake those? Absolutely. All right, more on this. Make outcomes appear less attractive. Try to show why. If you buy that other condo instead of yours, it's not such a good deal as you think. Make the cost of obtaining goals appear higher, and then make demands and positions appear more or less attractive to the other party, whichever suits your needs. So once again, is negotiation sales at some point? Yeah, you got to sell your position and point and why you're right. But once again, if you have facts, you're going to be in better shape to do that. All right, so how can you manipulate the cost or delay, plan disruptive actions? And once again, most of you guys aren't going to be in situations where you're going to try to inflict pain on the person you're negotiating against, although one of the most highly negotiated things in the world now is divorce. Okay? 50% of all marriages end in divorce. Is there financial hardship in a divorce proceeding? You think people plan disruptive action or do things during divorce to try to inflict pain on the other party or hold out? Yeah, it happens. Okay, but the example they give you is if a union went on strike, they're a food service workers union. So what they did then is every day at lunchtime, they all went in there and ordered a cup of coffee. Why were they doing that? How much does a cup of coffee cost? $1. So what's that table going to generate in income? $4. What's it going to generate if somebody's there eating lunch? $7, $8 a head. Okay, so they were going in there, and that's why I got all the coffee drinkers at when I owned the Hardee's business. I did not like having that crowd because they tied up tables. I had to clean up behind them. It was labor cost, and it was like 50 cents for a cup of coffee. It wasn't worth it. So this union goes on strike, and then they go in and fill up all the tables, so now the restaurant can't sell lunch because all their tables are full of people drinking coffee. And you really can't kick them out. So same thing, when you guys are at a restaurant, man, good restaurants, why do they want to get you the food fast? To make you happy, one, they want you to talk about the good service, but if they can turn that table over 5 times in a night, think about versus 4. That's a 20% increase in revenue. Same thing with my drive-thru. Why did I serve 3 or 4 cars at a time? 1, because I wanted good service, but number 2, I increased probably by 50 to 60% the amount of cars I could run through the drive-thru in the morning. Increased my revenue by probably 50% in that drive-thru operation by getting the cars out of there and going out to the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th car. Think about Subway, world's largest franchise. But how much money do you think Subway is like busting out at the seams? Making a ton of money? How many sandwiches can you make in an hour? Yeah. Times $5, $6, $7, $8 a sandwich. So you can maximize what their revenue is going to be. It ain't all that great. And how many hours are they busy, like solid hours? 11 to 1, 11 to 2 maybe? What about from 2 to 5? People have already eaten lunch, too early for dinner. It's a lull, it's a downtime. So you've got to increase the amount of business you go into. All right, form an alliance with outsiders, involve other parties who can influence the outcome, and that's always hearsay, word of mouth. And then schedule manipulations if you can. But once again, I try to stay out of all that. At some point, if I'm having to do all this, I want to walk away from the negotiation. It's not going to be that worth it to me. All right, so positions taking, opening offers. Where will you start? That and the original counter offer define the early bargaining range, okay? She's asking 145, I offer 135, early bargaining range. Opening stance, is it going to be competitive or moderate, and concessions? Okay, so let me go ahead and say one thing about concessions. Make them small. All right, make your concessions small. If I go from 135 to 140, I've given up $5,000 right in that one stroke. Okay? Why not go to 137? I might end up getting to 140, but I've still got a chance at 138, 139 before I get there. So make your concessions small and watch what the other party does. How are they? And I think too many times we meet in the middle. Is that a good strategy? Well, we're both giving in the same amount. But what's it relative to? Relative to your asking price or your starting price. If I'm asking 145, but my walk away is 125, and we meet in, and you say 135, and we meet at 140, seller got a good deal on that. So they were willing to go a whole lot lower, but by inflating that asking price, they were able to make that concession, or meeting in the middle relative to your actual target point. So don't always make that just meet in the middle thing. Initial concession, should there be made? If so, how long? And so my notes, if your opening offer is close to the resistance point, you're not going to have room to make concessions. Okay, if I'm offer 135, but I can't pay more than one, or I'm asking 145, but I won't take more than 140 is what my walkaway point. I don't have much room, wiggle room in there, so I need to raise my asking price so that I have some room to come down. And when you're able to make concessions, your opponent will likely reciprocate, and it turns into a positive situation. So what happens if the lady's asking 145 and he says 135, and she says, okay, I'll come down to 140, and he says no, 135. So she made a concession and he didn't. Is that a good situation? For the buyer it is, yeah. If you're the seller, is that a good situation? So sometimes you can make contingent concessions. Okay, I'll do this, but will you do this? And you guys are doing shirts or something, okay, I'll buy the extra 10, but you throw in this. So am I saying I'm going to buy the extra 10? No, I'm making it conditional on something. So don't forget about that either, making something conditional, because once you make a concession, you're pretty much locked in, and then if they don't make one, I've lost ground in my position. And also small concessions. All right, roll of concessions. Without them, we're either not going to do a deal or we're going to take the first deal. So that's why concessions are important. Patterns of concession making. One of the things they tell you too is, like as a boss, you don't want to get into a pattern with your employees as far as what you're willing to do, because they can read you and they know. How about parents? Parents are the ultimate negotiator for the kids. Okay, you guys think back. Could you read your parents sometimes and kind of know, hey, can I stay up for 12, 11, 11:30? Got to a pattern, you know? So you want to avoid doing something the same way every time. You don't want people to be able to read you. And then final offers, this is all I can do. So what is that? What happens when you say this is my final offer? You lock it in. Okay? What I would suggest to you is if you give somebody your final offer It needs to be your final offer. What happens if it's not? If you walk out, the guy, you're trying to buy that car and you really want it, you go, look, I can't pay more than $15,000. He said, I'm sorry, I can't sell it for less than 16, and you turn around and walk away, and then 3 days later you come back.
They know what to expect. They understand what you're willing to pay.
And chances are, if you come back, are you now, if they haven't changed, then they know you may be willing to pay more. So when you give that last offer, stick to it. If not, you lose credibility.
But if you come back and you just repeat that you're on your final offers to them,
You can do it. Unless they change, nothing's going to change.
Do you recommend avoiding the final offer title? Because then it essentially makes your statement concrete, and negotiations at that point become irrelevant.
I do, with the exception of, I got to get done with this. Look, we're either going to do this or we're not. And at that point, I have said final offer. Okay, look, I'm done dealing with this. I've spent all the time on this I can spend. I'm willing to do this. If you can't do it, count me out. Okay, but when I say that, I'm out. Okay, don't call me.
I imagine that idea of credibility is only valid if you see that person again for future negotiations, no?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, but it follows you, and especially if you're in a profession where you're dealing with the same people over and over and over again, like lawyers. You have plaintiff lawyers, you have defense lawyers for insurance companies. Guys, these guys deal with the same people all the time. So is reputation important in that situation? Yeah, absolutely.
So what if they have a drop their price, but it came like several months later and they still haven't been able to sell the car?
And ask again. You know, I would say that's starting to put you in a position of strength, because if they can't sell it, especially cars are not that big a deal. Those guys floor plan and all, and certainly they want to turn them over. But a house is a little bit different deal. When you see a house that's been on the market for 6 months, and you're kind of looking at it, and then all of a sudden it's a year and it's still on the market. Most people can't afford to have a house sitting there for a year and paying the taxes, even if nobody's living there. Taxes, insurance, upkeep, it's depreciating, your roof's a year older. You're losing money by letting that house sit there. So that's when you can start, I think, maybe nibbling away at the price. If you lose money.
Could you just clarify what capitulation and deadlock?
Okay, so if you don't have concessions, capitulation means you say 140 and I say, okay, we're not making it. I capitulate. I just say, okay, we got a deal. But I'm paying your price. Then deadlock means if you say 140 and I say 130 and neither of us offer a concession, we don't have a deal. And so without moving closer to each other, you got no deal. So that's where concessions come in.
When you state a final offer and you come back later, would it be bad if you try to get an even better offer?
I mean, it's not bad, but it's just you're being inconsistent a little bit, but things change. If the situation, like I said, if that car is still 3 months from now and it's still on the lot, at some point they're going to want to get rid of it. So you go back and make another offer. What's the worst thing that happens? They say no.
Right.
What it cost them?
Nothing.
Nothing. Okay? Ask. Start asking. Okay, so and final offers, making a commitment, and we talked about that, and concessions. All right, establish a commitment. So when we're getting to the end of the deal, there's 3 things that a commitment needs. They got to be finality. Once we do this, we're going to live by what we say. It's got to be specificity, meaning it's got to specifically outline what you're going to do and what I'm going to do, and there's got to be consequences if not. So when you guys going to go to law school, hopefully, when you do contracts, you're going to have these things. It's going to be final. It's going to be specific. Matter of fact, why is a contract that's saying I'm going to sell this and buy this 40 pages of lawyer speak? I mean, because they get paid by the hour. That's part of it. But they try to outline every little detail because you don't want anything falling through the cracks. And then consequences. What happens if I breach this deal? And some of you guys may be asked to sign employment contracts in some cases. a non-compete clause, which there's certain things that have to come in place for an employer to be able to ask you to do that. But if you sign that non-compete and you leave that business, you may not be able to work for a period of 2 years or something in that same industry or in that area. When I sold my restaurant, the guy that I sold it to, there was a clause in the contract that said I couldn't open a restaurant in that town for a period of 3 years. Why? Because it's happened before. People have sold their business, then they were the driving force of the business, so they went and opened another business, the same business, right after they sold their business to somebody else and took all their old customers back. And that's where lawyers come into play. They protect you from stuff like that happening. All right, so preventing the other party from committing prematurely. Sometimes, you know, you may not want somebody to commit to something that you don't think they can live up to. So commitment does give the other party a sense of security because you're saying, okay, this I'm going to lock in the deal. So it kind of gives me a little bit of sense of good feeling. And then people often commit when they get angry or feel pushed, and those are never good. If you guys ever finally said, okay, I'll do it. When somebody keeps nagging you, that's not going to be a good commitment because there's duress involved. As a matter of fact, in legal standing, if you're forced into doing something or it's considered duress, then it voids a contract because you can't be forced into doing something. So stay away from bullying. There are negotiators you guys will deal with that will try to bully you into a deal. Just walk away. Don't deal with that. But you guys are going to deal with bosses that you can't afford to leave your job, and they're going to be asking unreal stuff from you. I had a former student that worked for a very major corporation, and I hadn't seen him in a while, and I go, man, how come I hadn't seen you around much? He said, man, we're getting killed. And it was back in 2008, 2009. He said, the company knows none of us can afford to quit our jobs, and so they're just killing us. Couldn't walk away because there were no jobs back there at that time. So you're going to deal with people like that, but try to stay out of those situations. But once you do commit, then it reduces your flexibility because you've locked in. All right, so ways to create a commitment. I announce it, linking with an outside base, especially with social media now, it's pretty easy to do. Increase the prominence of demands or reinforce the threat or promise. And once again, try to stay away from having to threaten somebody. You know, if you don't give me a raise, I'm going to quit. I wouldn't try that one. What would you guys do if you're a boss and some employee came to that? And even if they're really valuable, you're not going to want to go on like that for long. It's just not the way to handle it. All right, so how do you abandon a committed position? Let's say you've locked in a deal and you kind of figure out it's really not a good deal for either party. You can plan a way out, let it die silently, and I have notes. Given what has now transpired, I may have to rethink my earlier position. So basically, you say things have changed. Let it die. Sometimes you make a deal, especially with your buddies or something, and then you both kind of forget about it. Restate the commitment, and that's just kind of reinforcing the fact that, well, here's what it is. Are you sure you want to do that? And then minimize the damage if the other backs off. There's sometimes you may want to let somebody out of a deal because it's going to cause hardship. But, you know, what I would say to commitments and deal is don't sign something unless you're going to go through with it. Stay out of that situation and just do your due diligence before you sign a deal and try to stay out of having to break a commitment. So is it okay to break a commitment? Here's a good one for you guys. You guys have accepted a job, right, an offer, and so the job fair is coming up here in end of this month, September. And so you have accepted a job, you go to the job fair, you go through the interview process, and so you've been offered a job to start January 5th. Well, in November, one of your dad's friends calls you and offers you something that's a whole lot better than what you've already accepted. Is it okay to break that commitment? 100%.
Wouldn't direct honesty be appreciated?
Still need an employee
Oh, well,
that I planned on starting in January 6th, and I let all the other people that I'd interviewed go. It is, but I know a lot of people, and you guys are going to be in this situation. I love this situation. People come to me and go, Mr. Garner, I'm supposed to let somebody know by Monday if I'm going to take the job or not, but I've got an interview the following Friday with the job I really want. So what's going to happen if you go into that company and go, hey, can I have the Friday? I got another interview with this company that I really want better than you. How's honesty going to work for us?
Couldn't you just negotiate after you get that job that's so much better? You tell the other employer about the situation and say, if you raise up my prices.
You could, as long as you're willing to go through with that. What happens if they match it and you really want that other job?
Well, if they give you the right incentive and be the job you want.
They can. I mean, once again, that goes to an ethical thing. You've given your word, but there's no. So go back to when we make a commitment. Are there consequences to doing that?
Yeah.
Maybe, probably minimal. What are the consequences?
That you essentially eliminated everyone else who was being considered for that position because you assumed the role.
But consequences to you personally for changing your decision.
Your reputation.
Your reputation, but it's with one company. So are they going to like post an announcement on the social world that says Adam's a scumbag and don't ever hire him because he won't come to work for you?
Probably not.
I mean, probably in a small scale, it's not going to hurt you that bad. Once again, it goes to an ethical thing. But as an employer, I wouldn't want that person working for me. I would rather them go work because what's going to happen? They're going to leave in a year anyway. And that goes to that whole thing with turnover. Guys, turnover. Why is turnover important? Because it's expensive. And once I hire somebody and I've got a year invested in you and you know what you're doing, and all of a sudden you quit, now I've got to hire somebody and retrain somebody. And that takes time and money to do that. The recruiting and training, or recruiting and hiring process takes money, and then the training process takes money. So I would rather somebody get out in the first place. And I'm a little different. If somebody gets a good offer, because of the story I told you about Mr. Warren, me admitting to go to work for him and then getting a better offer and him being like greatly supportive, I would support people doing that because I think you need to do what's best for your family. Okay? But it can leave that person who very nicely offered you a job in a kind of a tough situation. And it's just something you got to weigh. But go back to that, in that situation, are there consequences for you? Minimal. So people break commitments all the time? Yeah. It's part of life. Not a good part, but it is part. All right, so closing the deal, provide alternatives, and that's good sometimes. But when you offer somebody alternatives to a deal, what that says is, I'm not trying to force you into any one thing. I want to give you a choice, okay? You can buy 5 at this price, you can buy 15 at this price. So give people alternatives. Assume the close. Any of you guys sales majors? Or taking Valentino's sales class? You guys know what assume the close means? Okay, so when do you want me to deliver them? Okay, so you basically are assuming that we've already done the deal. That's a sales technique. Split the difference. Once again, in Module 2, we'll go over that. And I'm going to tell you stay away from splitting the difference if you can. I'd rather you make a small incremental commitment or give up a little bit than cutting it in half. Exploding offers. I'm going to go into those more detail later, but let me tell you just on the quick what they are. You guys ever, and I know it happens, leasing an apartment, and they'll go, okay, well, I'll offer it to you at this price, but you got to let me know something by 5 o'clock today. Why are they doing that? Why should the price be different at 5 o'clock today than it would be at 8 o'clock tomorrow? What's generally the purpose?
Well, I worked at Publix in the summer, and I had our prices literally change every day. So I'm not sure if this is the same for everything, but they literally change.
And so why, but if you told somebody that, in most cases, why would somebody tell somebody, I want you to do this?
Using more pressure to commit.
You're trying to pressure them into that price. Okay, so once again, evaluate it. Now, are there exploding offers that are legit? Absolutely. You guys are interviewing for a job, and the guy goes, I got to know something by Friday because if you're not taking it, I've got to hire somebody else. There are situations where I got to know something, and I'm not trying to force you into a decision. I don't care one way or the other. I just got to know. I've been in that situation. I had to hire a teacher one time. The guy I wanted was dragging me around. I knew he was wanting a better offer, but I was his fallback, and finally I had to tell him, if I don't hear something from you by Friday, I'm moving on, because I had to have somebody. So I wasn't trying to force him into the offer. I was just realistically saying, I've got to have a warm body by next fall, so if you're not coming, I got to move on. But there's a lot of cases. I had a car dealer tell me, okay, I'll sell it to you for that price, but you got to be here by 5 o'clock today. I said, so 8 o'clock in the morning, it's not price. Nope. Okay. Trying to force me into something. Deal sweeteners, throw in extra. And here's a good thing. You guys go buy some work clothes. You go into Men's Warehouse and you spend, $1,000 on suits. Guarantee you can get a free tie. And you get a free tie. You ask. I just spent $1,000 in suits. How about you throw in a tie? And that's called nibbling. And asking for something after you've done a deal. All right, so dealing with hardball tactics, once again, try to stay out of situations. I don't like dealing with people who are hardball people. 4 main options: ignore them, discuss them, ask them why they're doing it, respond in kind, and then it becomes, once again, another situation try to stay out of. And then try to, if somebody's hardballing you, try to figure out a way to kind of break down that barrier. And but look at the notes, very important. Hardball tactics work best against poorly prepared negotiators. If I have my stuff together, you're not going to force me into something because I have my facts and I know that it's not the best deal that I'm going to get because I've already shopped, I've already looked around, I know what's out there. And generally, people who use hardball tactics are not very good negotiators. They're bullies. And there's a very prominent individual now that falls into that category. Okay, co-op, find common ground. All right, good cop, bad cop. You guys heard of that? So the good cop comes in, or the bad cop comes in first. It's really rough to the guy, and then the next person comes in, and the person is so relieved to have somebody what they consider normal or nice coming in that they automatically give concessions. So that happens in negotiating. You send in some real jerk, and then the person that comes in behind, oh, so-and-so had to leave, I'm going to take over, and you're real nice. Psychologically, all of a sudden now I'm more willing to deal. Bogey, playing up an issue of little importance. There's something that you really don't care about, but you make it like it's huge, and that way you're going to get something in return for something that really means nothing to you. So that's, once again, kind of a deceptive tactic. And then the nibble, I just mentioned that. Ask for something at the close of a deal. I've just spent $1,000. How about throw in a tie? And you can get that very easily. Not hard. Okay, so you're offered this job, and there's or you're trying to think something so like really not important that you say, oh, it's a really big deal, or like maybe a house with a swimming pool, and I don't know. Let me think about it, because I do know it's.
Take a stab at it.
Yeah, sure.
Would it be like if you're buying a house, but there were like a big cracked window, and you say, I don't know if I can afford to get some of those places
Right.
window, even though it's significant, you're going to use it as a sticking point.
Right. Play up something that's not important, or I'm going to have to fix, there's a plumbing issue or whatever, and I'm going to have to spend all this money. Well, you got a brother-in-law that's a plumber that's going to do it for you for free. So you play up and go, yeah, I don't know. I don't want to have to go through all that and fix that when I get in. So yeah, something that's just really insignificant, or in the scope of the deal, it's insignificant, and you play that up like it is a big deal. Good, thanks. All right, so MPP, very important, maximum plausible position. If somebody's selling a house, their asking price is $200,000, and you offer them $50,000, what are they going to say? Get out of here. They why? Because you have basically insulted them. So maximum plausible position says you want to make the lowest offer that's still credible. So $200,000. If I offer $150,000, is that? That's in a range. Maybe it's pretty low. They're probably not going to take it, but it's not going to insult them. So it's the most you can ask that would, and still not just be, like a jerk and do it. All right, then how do you handle the nibble when somebody asks you for something that wasn't in the original deal? You ask them what else they want. You want some shoes, a couple shirts? Okay, just try to throw it back at them. And then the other thing is have your own counter nibble. Sure, I'll throw in a tie. If you want to buy a couple shirts, you go with it. I'll do that. So, but from your perspective, if you guys are doing business, ask. Spend $1,000. Get a tie. You should. How much does that salesperson make? A bunch of money. What's the cost of a tie? Very little. Yeah, in the company too. Or if the person has to make it, they're still making more on commission than the tie cost. All right, chicken. You guys know what chicken is? It's from an old James Dean movie. You guys ever heard of chicken, where two cars are going at each other? And the one that goes first. Now, I don't see how that's the winner. Not a game you want to play. Intimidation, once again, stay away. Aggressive. And then snow job is something that lawyers do. They'll ask for discovery, and you have to give them information. So that one piece of paper they want is buried in the 8 boxes of papers that you send over to their office. So now they're going to have to find a paralegal to dig through all those 8 boxes to find that one piece of information that you have in there. So that's like overwhelming somebody. Yeah, you want discovery, you want information? Here it is. Knock yourself out. So I got audited by the IRS once when we owned our business, and like later on, I was thinking, because after we sold our business, you have to keep your records for 7 years. So if they were to ever to come, it would have just been, I would have just handed them boxes of stuff. Now it's better because you have storage, virtual storage. But in the old days, we had boxes of stuff that we had to keep at my house for 7 years because you're responsible for that. I think that's it. All right, so that's just kind of a summary. Those are on the file. So okay, so on Thursday we'll do integrated negotiation. How to work a deal with somebody that's positive for both groups.